Hello, everybody, all you stay-at-home travelers. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on polar expedition cruising. My name is Steve Wellmeier, and I'll be your webinar co-host today. I manage Poseidon Expeditions North American office from here in Providence, Rhode Island. And as you can see, I'm working from home like half of the country is in these times. Before we get started, I'd like to make sure everyone can hear us okay. And if you can, open your chat box at the bottom of the screen and just type the symbol plus sign in and just give me an indication that, that you can hear us. That'd be great. Yeah, a lot of people are checking in, I see, great. Thank you for that. So far, we have about 30 people. I think probably a few more people will join us as we move into the webinar. So today we're going to talk about expedition cruising to the polar regions. We're going to cover this type of travel in a general way. We're not going to get into too many specifics about particular itineraries or destinations. We'll save that for future webinars later this summer. But I think there's plenty to talk about how this type of cruising, expedition cruising in the polar regions is different, considerably different from what you expect on larger traditional cruise ships in more traditional cruising areas. So we want to make sure we can provide you that differentiation so you have a better appreciation of what expedition cruising is all about. But if you have any specific questions, we're going to save about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please ask us any kind of specific question you might have about some of our destinations like Svalbard or Antarctica, South Georgia in the Southern Ocean, or Franz Josef Land in the Russian High Arctic, or even the North Pole. We'll be happy to answer your questions. So my co-host, who I'll introduce momentarily, she's prepared the PowerPoint presentation that you're going to be looking at today. And there's plenty of great photos that she'll share with us. And since she's going to be doing most of the talking because she's spent a lot more time in both the Arctic and Antarctica than I have. So just briefly, here are some of the things we're going to try to cover today. A little background on expedition cruising in the polar regions and on Poseidon Expeditions. We'll give you a little background on the company. Why are people interested in traveling to the polar regions? What are the attractions? Why do they want to go? And maybe most interesting of all, Anja's going to share with us her favorite polar destination and maybe one that she would recommend for first timers. So we'll get to that as well. Let me just tell you a little bit about my own background in expedition cruising and small ship cruising. I'm currently the managing director of Poseidon Expeditions USA. That's the North American office for Poseidon Expeditions. I've been involved in small ship travel. That's the marketing and sales, primarily public relations of small ship travel since 1983, and polar expedition cruising specifically since 1997 is when I first got involved in it. Before joining Poseidon, I was also the executive director of IATO for 5 years. That's the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators. So I have a pretty good feel of all the issues and concerns about tourism in Antarctica specifically, and also the Arctic. I know a fair amount about it. So this business is made up of all kind of people, people like Anja, for example, who is started out as a field staff, expedition staff member. And I find that people like Anja have a deep passion and appreciation for the Antarctic environment, for the Arctic environment, the wildlife, the nature, the marine life. I'm a little different. I'm an office guy, but my passion is similar, but it's about the business of the polar regions. That's what I really enjoy, the marketing, the selling, public relations aspect of it, and telling our audiences about these fantastic destinations. So it takes all kind of people to make a company successful, and so bear with me on that. I'll tell you a little bit about Poseidon Expeditions. The company started in 1999, and so we've been in operation for more than 20 years now. Initially, the primary business for Poseidon was North Pole trips with a icebreaker. So for a dozen years or so, this is their main focus, taking people to the geographic North Pole. In recent years, it's been aboard the 50 Years of Victory, the nuclear-powered icebreaker, part of the Russian icebreaking fleet, which Poseidon charters each summer for trips to the geographic North Pole. So we also did some additional trips in the Russian high Arctic in those early years of Poseidon Expeditions. And then at a few 6, 7, 8 years ago, the company wanted to grow and broaden its appeal, broaden the type of products that it was able to offer. And so we started looking at Antarctica, we started looking at other ships, and we needed a year-round vessel that we could operate in both the Arctic and Antarctica. And we found the Sea Spirit, which is a fantastic ship for us. It's an ice-class ship, carries 114 people. And so that's our main vessel that we use in Antarctica and in the Arctic during the summer months, during the astral summer months in Antarctica, of course. And you can see a few things there on the slide about the particular ship, the particulars about the ship, 114 passengers, designed for polar cruising specifically. And with a fleet of Zodiac vessels, Anja will tell you more about that, and presentation lounge for educational presentations during the cruise. The Sea Spirit is kind of like a migrating bird. It follows the weather patterns and goes up to the Arctic during the migration, the Great Migration, and we take advantage of all the wildlife up there and the seabirds that are migrating up there. And similarly, when we go to Antarctica in the end of September, and we begin our season in Antarctica in the end of October. So Anja, why don't you take over and tell us a little bit more about your background and what you do with Poseidon Expeditions, what your responsibilities are, and we can move right on into the rest of the webinar.
Okay, that sounds great. I have a few pictures from the ship still that you can imagine what it is like, what it looks like. You're hopefully going to be home away from home with the bar area, of course. We have the bridge. We have a very good library, which I think it's important also for the expedition cruises, and a lecture hall. We are going to talk about presentations a little bit later, and just a few pictures before I'm going to start, because I think the ship is a very nice one. It's a very nice and small one. And just a few words to myself. First of all, very welcome to everybody who is here on this webinar. Very happy that you have the time to listen to us. So my name is Anja. I started 20 years ago in the business. I studied tourism management in Germany. So first a little bit, maybe the background and the office. And then I decided I want to be out in the field. And that's when I started to be in Greenland. And I have been leading now for around 20 years. I have been working on different sizes of ships before joining Poseidon full-time a few years ago. And now basically I'm still in the field. I don't let that go. I want to be on board for around, let's say 3-4 months. And then in the rest, I have home office. I do, for example, that I look after the team. I do the coordination, planning, the representation of the company in different organizations. I do the permit work with the government. So a little bit of both areas, but still keep the foot in the field. I love being in the polar areas. Untypically, maybe for a German, I like challenges, and there are plenty of them. You have to be very flexible also in these areas due to ice and weather. I find it an absolutely fascinating area, and our goal is always that when you come on board as a guest, you understand that we are not the crazy ones that come back year after year, but that there is a real passion, and we hope that we can actually transmitted to the guests that we have.
So Anja, you're in Germany working currently in your home office, and I just wanted to ask our friends on the other side of the screen where they're located and see who all we're talking to. So if you can just maybe type into your chat box there very quickly your location, your current location, and we'll just share that with you and let you know where our participants are sitting right now. Dallas, Texas, okay. David McKay, I know you're at home in California. Laguna Hills, Los Angeles, Canada, Chicago, Florida, Sacramento again, Alabama. So we've got people from all over the country. And I think Ida, and Ryan are joining us too from Svalbard, right, Anja?
Yeah, from Svalbard, and I see some from Austria as well, Austria and Norway.
All right. Oh, there you go, Tenerife.
Very good.
All right, Anja, maybe you can tell us a little bit more specifically about expedition cruising in the polar regions, and what makes an expedition cruise an expedition cruise, and how it's different from traditional cruise ships, larger cruise ships, that type of thing.
All right, before we start, maybe just as an overview what we are talking about, because expedition cruises worldwide, but of course we concentrate on the polar areas. As you see on this map on the top, we have here Antarctica. You see very clearly the West Antarctic side. You see the peninsula going towards a left-hand side. So that is where we are concentrating on. And of course, when we are in the Arctic, Greenland, you see here very nicely, we have Iceland, Svalbard, and Franz Josef Land. So these are the areas that we concentrate on today. We do have trips to the North Pole, but that is really a separate topic. So we are going to talk about it later. What is different about expedition cruising? Like, I don't like the word when somebody says, oh, I come and I cruise with you. I don't like it, because expedition is quite different. And the difference, for example, is to, in order to compare it with conventional cruises, we have a Zodiac fleet. And I think that is one of the biggest things that make an expedition an expedition. Expeditions go to remote areas. We go to areas where there is no port. And then we use our small landing crafts, as you see here, called Zodiacs. And we do have 11 of them at the ship. And I like small expedition ships because I can go out with all of them at any time. And we are very quick in our operation. So what do you do with these Zodiacs and expedition cruising? You use them for cruising. Sometimes, for example, you see fantastic ice formations. Sometimes you see wildlife that you were not expecting, and then you lower your Zodiac fleet, and then you're going to use it maybe for a cruising, 1.5, 2 hours, enjoy the landscape, the ice, the fascination just of the area. And there is really a lot to see and to be fascinated about when you are cruising there, and to sit in a Zodiac and have the different angle. I think that is something very good. What's also nice to know is that in expeditions, the drivers is not a crew member, but it's an expedition team, so that we can explain directly what we are seeing. And that is something I think the guests appreciate. Besides the use of the Zodiacs for the cruising, it is of course our means of transportation ashore. That means we use it to go to a landing site. We try to find one. As I mentioned, there are no set landings. We have to maybe land on rocks. Maybe we are going to land like here in Antarctica on a beach and Deception Island. So we see what we find. And that is a big aspect, I think, of expeditions, that you travel in a very nice way to a very remote area that is otherwise not quite accessible. Expeditions also means that you have to be flexible. If you are somebody that is holding tight to the itinerary and say, here it says day 1, day 2, day 3, this is what I do from 8 o'clock to 10, that doesn't work. Please don't come then. Expedition means let's look what the weather is like. Let's see the ice conditions and be flexible. We know that our guests are there only once, and we want to make the most out of it. And that is also, I think, something very, very special. Usually expeditions, I associate with expeditions a particular educational factor, meaning that if you want to have piano nights every night, play bingo and do like a lot of other things, maybe you will not join an expedition. You will not enjoy it, because many of our guests, they want to be educated to a special extent. It doesn't mean that we lecture you to death. We have an expedition team of 13. We are biologists, we are historians, we are ornithologists, always depending on the area, and we are with you. That means we give lectures, we give presentations, we meet you, we give recaps, we tell you about the next day. Like here, you see a hiking group, that means we are with you. So if you have a question, it is answered right away.
Anja, the other thing that's nice about being on a smaller ship is you have a lot of FaceTime with the staff. You have more time informally on the decks, in the Zodiacs, to ask your own questions and not just rely on the presentations to get information. But there's a lot of one-on-one opportunities for one-on-one on a cruise like this.
Oh, 100%. And that's why personally, the smaller the ship is, of course, the more you can interact also with the guests. You can see very quickly what do the guests like, for example, what kind of lecture topics. So you can adapt also as a team quite nicely. So the small ship here has very many adventures. And also, of course, for an expedition, you meet people that maybe usually would not get together. I don't know if you agree, Steve, but I have the feeling many of our guests are actually individual travelers. But because you go to a remote area, you have to get together, and you can only get there with a ship. So people with the same interest, they are coming here together and share. And I think it creates a very, very nice atmosphere.
Yeah. One of the nice things about going to international destinations like Antarctica, which doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to everyone, but not to any sovereign nation specifically. It's great to visit a place like this with people from other parts of the country. It just seemed to lend itself to visiting such a place as Antarctica. So Anja is correct about that. Let me take a pause just for a second and just ask our audience, and again, you can just put in the chat box yes or no, or where you've been. How many of us, our participants, have been in the polar regions previously? Arctic, Antarctica, Svalbard. Just give me a few ideas, and it'll give us a better sense of the expertise of the participants that we're speaking with. So Antarctica, yeah, all continents, but no polar. So there you go. You have to go to Antarctica, I suppose. Not yet, not yet. Antarctica, Svalbard, Greenland. Wow, some people here have been to quite a few polar destinations. Others say they're ready to go and anxious to go. Anja, why don't you tell the participants what do you think is a good starting point for visiting the Arctic regions? You know, what might they explore first? Of course, a lot of people want to go to Antarctica first. It's been known longer, and it's on people's bucket list because it's the 7th continent, but maybe you've got some different ideas.
I have put a few things together. Now, first, I want to talk a bit about the Arctic, and then I thought maybe we talk about Antarctica, just to see what the difference is, because I think it depends very much where you are living, where you are starting. I like the Arctic, for example, as a starting point, because it gives you an idea if you like the ice. Like, for example, here you see from Norway, for us from Europe, it's not a long travel as well. So for me, the Arctic in this sense is a good starting point. If you don't know if this is actually, for example, your cup of tea. So I have a few slides now first, and we look a little bit into Svalbard, a little bit for Franz Josef Land, and also for Greenland, so we can see the differences. So we are concentrating for the Arctic, basically on the European and then on the Russian Arctic, with great scenery, ice, history, and of course, possible wildlife encounters. So here we have the routes. First of all, in the north, what we are doing, just to have a little overview. Once again, we do have the trips also from the UK, but let's concentrate on Svalbard, Franz Josef Land, and East Greenland now. This is for me the Arctic. This is a very typical picture. Okay, here you have nice calm seas. You have Ryan, one of our expedition leaders, and he's driving the Zodiac. You have a big ice front, and that's for me really the Arctic. Fantastic with the scenery, and of course with the ice and with the sounds. And as I mentioned, the wildlife, of course, we have here in Svalbard. And the difference for me between Arctic and Antarctic is that in the Arctic, you really have to search for wildlife. I come back for it later in Antarctica. So you have to be also active, like not only the team, but also as a guest, you better be a bit active. You please bring your binoculars. I'm always amazed how many guests are coming and don't have binoculars because, well, we hope to see, for example, polar bears, but they are not next to you. So you have to have polar bears, you have to be active. And you also have to keep in mind that it's a search, it's wildlife. And if we are lucky to see one, then we are lucky, but there are also many other things to explore. So I find it important that people not only concentrate and make it a great trip if you see a polar bear, because there are many other things also to see, but with luck and with people looking, observing, we maybe see a polar bear. And that of course is a great sign. But there's not only polar bears, reindeer there, maybe a walrus, when we are lucky in the Arctic areas, maybe other seals. And for example, a place that I really like for history, if you are into that, and even if you are not into history, you will be into history when you have reached Franz Josef Land. Many people have not heard about it. It's about the Russian archipelago. It's a national park. And it's really stunning. It's an upcoming area, I think. Svalbard is a place where many people start with. Franz Josef Land is already a little step further, I think, in the expedition list. And you have not only the scenery, but as I mentioned, historical places. And when you come to a place, for example, like this, where some explorers overwintered, and you only can admire those ones. You cannot get around the admiration for these.
Anja, I can just add for, I think most Americans would find Franz Josef Land very interesting because at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, there were a number of expeditions American financed expeditions that started in Franz Josef Land in their attempts to reach the North Pole. They were all failures, which of course there's very many interesting stories about that, but this was kind of the base of operations for a number of American expeditions to attain the North Pole. And at that time, these expeditions were all financed by the newspapers. They were all in a race to get sensational news for themselves. So they would finance these expeditions and create a lot of excitement.
No, definitely. And we will talk about it also on the ship. History is quite a big topic next to the wildlife, of course, and the scenery. It is also a place where everywhere in the Arctic you meet a lot of ice. And that is really fascinating, which also, as I mentioned before, you have to be flexible. There are geological features that are unique basically in the world, like here, Champ Island on Franz Josef Land. And what is nice in the Arctic to travel at this time, at least for me, is a light, because you have 24-hour daylight during this time. And I'm sorry to say you don't sleep much, because the nicest light is around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe the photographers agree that have been already to polar areas and you have a yellowish light. So there are many things to explore. The more you keep your eyes open, the more you are going to see. That is basically expeditions. And sometimes you're really astonished about what you're going to see. Like here, for example, also a picture, this one from Franz Josef Land. And once again, it's not only the wildlife, there are some stations, some former stations that you can see as well. So there is a range of varieties that I think many people would find astonishing directly to find in the Arctic areas, not only wildlife and scenery, but much, much more.
So Anja, maybe you can spill the beans on what your favorite Arctic destination is.
Oh, how many hours you have time? No, I think, well, I think everybody loves a place first where you, or something sticks into your mind where you had the biggest experience that is very different from your home life. And I was very lucky to be in Greenland 20 years ago for the first time, for quite a long time, and live in a small village with 40 people and 200 dogs. So for me, that is Greenland, and I love it very much. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm talking the truth. And for me, Greenland is a bit different from the other places because we have a culture here, and I like to work with cultures. Don't understand me wrong. We have people living in Svalbard. We have people living, of course, in Franz Josef Land, but the culture, indigenous culture, that is only what we have in Greenland. And that's why I like to go very much to the East Coast. That's, yes, my favorite area. I must say there is something great. Of course, you cannot compare because it is very different. But when you work with people and you don't really know also what is coming, what do they like, how can we interact, how can we learn from each other, that is for me a highlight, and also something that has to do with traveling, actually. And also Greenland, we go there late in the season, which means it's usually around end of August to September. And if you see a picture like this and you tell people that they are walking through a forest in Greenland, first they think that something else than tea is in my cup, but actually this is a forest, but you have to look differently. And also these are nice autumn colors, and I enjoy that very, very much. By the way, we have a few pictures where maybe people think that everything has to be very active. We are a small ship, which means that we can separate our guests in groups however they like. Maybe some people want a longer hike, like we do here. Maybe you are out for 3 hours. Maybe another group wants to go for 1.5, 2 hours. Maybe we have some people that don't want to walk very much. Yeah? They want to stay at the beach. They want to be with a photographer. So please don't let these pictures make you think that you have to be active all the time. That is not expedition. Expedition means everybody finds their pace. And Greenland is very good for that. You have wildlife, for example, muskox in East Greenland that we hope to see very shy. And maybe one thing, if somebody here is very interested to have a chance to see a polar bear, even though Greenland is my favorite destination, I have to say, rather go to Svalbard, Franz Josef Land, but East Greenland is not the place for polar bears. Maybe we are lucky, but there are better areas. But for scenery and other wildlife encounters, I think it's great. And why you ask me to be great in Greenland, I mean, if you don't like this picture, then I don't know what to do. Like, that is typical East Greenland for me. Nice icebergs, fantastic colors. You see the first snow coming in the mountains. So it is really a great place. And you do have big icebergs, what many people don't know about East Greenland. You have some of the biggest icebergs here in the area. And it makes you realize how small sometimes you are, and that the worries that people think they have are not really there. So many things to see on land during the day and also at night. And that is, as it is later in the season, that means we are coming towards the darker period. We have already sunrises, we have sunsets, and we do have a chance for northern lights. And we have to warn you again, during the night, if there are northern lights, your expedition leader will wake you up. And if there are northern lights every night, we will wake you up every night. Because that's why you go and that's why you travel. And they are looking different every time. So please get up, you can sleep later. I think that is very important as well. And yes, I love Greenland and can recommend, besides all other areas, really to maybe consider going there.
Anja, can you let's head to the southern hemisphere and talk a bit about Antarctica and how it's different from Arctic expedition cruising. I mean, there are elements, of course, that are similar. use of zodiacs, ice.
Mhm.
But what are the main differences in terms of what the experience is all about?
Mhm. First, just quickly the overview map, so we all know where we are going to travel in the next slides. You have on the left-hand side Argentina, and usually over the Drake Passage, you come to the Antarctic Peninsula, and here you are staying at the western side of the peninsula. So just that we are all aware where the next pictures are coming from, as well as from the Falklands, Malvinas, to be politically correct. I always use both names, and also South Georgia.
Yeah, I should add that 95% of Antarctic tourism is to the Antarctic Peninsula. That's the little rhinoceros horn sticking up to the left there, the northwest. And that's the most accessible part from South America, so it's the most frequented. It also has very accessible wildlife, whereas other parts of Antarctica, it's much harder to find. The other parts of Antarctica are much harder to access, much more expensive to access. So the Antarctic Peninsula is really where it's at for Antarctic expedition cruising. Even the Australians go to South America to go to Antarctica. They don't go to Antarctica from their side of the world because it takes 3 or 4 days to get there from Australia. And so it's much easier to go from South America.
And when you go, that is a difference actually to the Arctic. You do have to put in a little bit of effort, because first we have time to put our educational program in, because it takes 1.5 to 2 days to go over the Drake Passage, Drake Shake or Drake Lake. Definitely an experience and well worth to go, because then you come down to Antarctica. As you already mentioned, many components are the same. So we talked about the zodiacs already. That operation is the same. We have the educational factor. So we do have our lectures. We have the expedition team. The difference is that you have to be even more flexible in Antarctica, because the weather changes are really much, much more than we have actually in the Arctic. Personally, I find that. So in Antarctica, it's very common. I have a plan A in the morning, and if you go out and it's a plan H, I think we are doing very well on that day. And so that is something, the weather changes. What is also different for me is that in the Arctic, I think you have to search for the wildlife. It's a search. You have to really be active to find it. While in Antarctica, where we go, usually the penguins are there. And now, let's tell the truth, most people go there also because, of course, I want to see the penguins. What I would find important is, as a guest, that you think about how your Antarctic experience should look like, because we have a long season. Our season is from end of October to March, and depends what you think about Antarctica. You have to tell your travel agent, you have to tell us, so we can advise on the right month. For example, if you come early season, this picture here is, for example, early season. That is November, beginning of December. You have a lot of snow. You have the penguins arriving. If you are coming then maybe in, let's say, December, if you're coming in January, then we have already some penguins that may be sitting on the nest. When you're in January, you have maybe already penguins that have some chicks. So you have to understand that it's not all the time that we see this. And when you come later in the season, the little penguins, they are teenagers, they're very active, they're running around. So there are many things actually to consider before you go to Antarctica, because when somebody has a wrong picture in the head and booked the wrong month, there's not much we can do on the ship, because that is gone. We cannot do that. What I also wish that people know is that we see the smaller penguins. That means you saw already pictures of gentoos, adelies, and like a shin strap, for example, here. And these are the penguins that you see plentiful here at the Antarctic Peninsula itself. There are, of course, seals around. As Steve mentioned, there are specific regulations, guidelines, how to approach the wildlife best. And we are going to tell you everything around it, so no worries. What I would like to mention, because the question comes quite a lot, you always see people with red jackets. That is something you get. We also have hiking sticks, so you don't need to bring hiking sticks. We do have some on the ship.
And boots.
And also the boots, yeah, and these are very good. You don't want to put boots in your luggage that weigh already like 10 kilos. So we have the boots you get for the trip, so no worries. But what is very important, and some people underestimate, look at all the faces. Everybody wears sunglasses. You have to bring your sunglasses because of the reflection, have to bring good sunscreen, and you have to bring waterproof trousers because of the weather changes. So this is something that also you keep in mind when you're going to Antarctica. Sometimes a question comes for whales, when to see it. Let's say when I started to go down in Antarctica, I usually would have say January, February for whales, but it's very much changing. And now we see whales, for example, humpbacks, all the time. So it's not like a season anymore. That has changed quite a lot in the past years. And if you go down to Antarctica, choose a small ship like Sea Spirit, because if we have a plan, but then suddenly we have a lot of whales, it means that we can just be flexible, turn our plans around and take this opportunity and maybe do a Zodiac cruise with the whales. So you have to take a small ship if you want the flexibility. So wildlife is there, maybe some stations or former stations that we can visit. I think it's nice for history, scenery, as well as, of course, wildlife. Antarctica is special for many people anyways. And we always get the question considerably often about albatross. And please, if you want to see albatross, like here, for example, black-browed albatross, you have to go on the bigger trip, not only down to the peninsula, which is a classic trip, as we call it. But if you want to see these albatross and privately owned islands, this is all on the Falklands. So you have to make the nice big trip on the Falklands. And please, if you are in Ushuaia at the pier on a classic trip and you say, I'm looking forward to see the king penguins, we have a problem. Because king penguins, like this, I mean, who doesn't want to see something like that? But king penguins, please, they are on South Georgia only. Yeah, so please look what you want to see, and then we can put the right trip for you. It's really worth it. It's a longer ride, but it's fantastic. It's something really, really unforgettable, not only for the king penguins that you see, but maybe you want to see also elephant seals. And for elephant seals, again, if you want to see the bulls fighting, like in the documentaries, you have to come in October, November trips.
Anja, I love this picture with the king penguins have a ringside seat to the fight. They're in the foreground.
Mm.
No, with the elephant seals.
Yeah, they are the watchers. They are
the referees.
And you know, when you have time to be outside, it is very important that also as a guest you take the time, like a penguin here, actually to relax and just watch maybe one animal for half an hour, 1 hour, just to see the behavior. It is really fascinating, and we can only recommend it. Also, South Georgia has a history, not the most pleasant one for whaling. There are a few whaling stations, but for example, you have the grave of Ernest Shackleton. I hope many people have heard the name before, a great explorer that is buried here. So we are going to visit those places, of course, as well.
Anja, can you talk a little bit about, you've talked quite a bit about the activities, the normal activities with expedition cruising, which is hiking, Zodiac cruising, but we have some additional, with the Sea Spirit anyway, we have some additional activities that people could participate in on an optional basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these optional activities are too. It's kayaking and camping. So let's first talk a little bit about kayaking. That is an activity optional, as you said, that we offer in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. I worked for a few companies. I really enjoy with Poseidon that we only allow kayakers with experience, because face it, that's not the area where you want to test if you have the skills. That is not the area. You have to have some kayak experience also to enjoy it, because you are around with the ice. We have a group that stays together. That means nobody else is going to join. This group stays together. They can develop together. They have these outings. And in the Arctic, we take 8 kayakers plus a kayak guide in the water and a safety zodiac. And in Antarctica, we take a bit more. We take 16. But people enjoy it because they are so close down at the water. I know you have done it as well, right? The kayaking?
Yes.
Yep. And it is quite something. You're close to nature. It's a unique experience, and definitely something that can be advisable for those with experience, once again. So that is kayaking. And when we go down to Antarctica, but only on the classic Antarctic itineraries, we try for a camping. And this is an experience that is limited because we try it once during a trip. And that is limited to 30 participants, 30 that want to have that special adventure in going out, meaning that you go out after dinner, you come back early morning, and believe me, you're ready early morning also to come back. And what you do is you go out and then you dig a little hole. That sounds a bit weird, but first you dig a little hole because during the night you want to lay a little bit lower in case the wind is coming and you are in here snugly with your sleeping bag, that the wind can go over you. So that's why you dig the little hole. We had tents in the beginning, but the guests didn't like it. So we took the tents away. And now basically that's what it looks like. You have to imagine the guys in with a nice mattress, a good sleeping bag, a BV bag, and just to listen to the sounds of the ice cracking, maybe is there some wildlife around, that is a very, very, for sure, unforgettable experience. So this is something that is available in the Antarctic only. Yeah.
Anja, finally, maybe you can just touch briefly, and I can maybe add a few things as well, about the kind of people who are interested in polar expedition cruising, the demographics, you know, how has it changed over the years? What are they looking for? What's the holy grail that they're looking for in the polar regions?
Like, I find that most guests that we have, as said, they are usually individual travelers. But to travel to these remote areas, they come on the ship and then they basically get together and experience it. We have international guests and that like to educate themselves as well. And they come out with an understanding of the nature, because you hear so many documentaries and there is so much around, let's say since the past 6-7 years, and they want to see with their own eyes. And I think that is very, very typical. And age-wise, that has changed, I think, a lot in the past years, because we see more and more younger people having an interest actually in the polar areas and look into citizen science, like participate in, for example, counting of whales. And as I said, being educated and not all the time, but to a special extent, and understand what they are seeing, and they want to understand what's going on worldwide.
Yeah, in addition to what Anja said, from my experience watching over the last 20-25 years, is not only are travelers getting younger interested in the polar regions, it used to be all empty nesters, and now we're seeing people in their 30s, some even in their 20s, single travelers, more and more single travelers willing to share accommodations with somebody of their own gender and willing to share, and also multi-generational families, grandparents, parents, and children. They want to experience this kind of a destination together as a small group, and really create memories that are unbelievable, that they'll all remember for the rest of their lives.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So, Anja, maybe just final word, you can talk about the polar bug.
Yeah, that is something that everybody should actually consider of, I don't know if you can say in our time, getting, but this is something that when you go to a polar area once, there is no middle way. Either you like it or you don't, but I can promise you, you like it once you make the step to go there. And we see that we have a lot of repeating guests, and they have the polar bug because once you see it, you want to see and experience other areas. And I can definitely speak also for the expedition team that they do all have it, and they're returning season after season. Personally, I always said that I do this job as long as I enjoy it. And I cannot see an end of it after 20 years. And you should be prepared for this as well as a traveler. We hope to see you again and again.
Thank you, Anja. Thanks for co-hosting this webinar, and thanks to all our participants out there. We enjoyed telling you a little about what we do and what we love, and can't wait to get back at it, right, Anja?
That's for sure. And thank you very much, Steve, for the organization. And thanks for everybody that joined us today. Looking forward to see you again.